What is up? Welcome back to another video. It is a first on the channel here because it is Tuesday and we have some news to talk about. Now this isn't going to be one of my highlight news videos. This is just going to be some news stories that I missed talking about yesterday, and I will get into as to why that is. But I also want to touch on the Kodak Financial call that took place today as I'm recording this Monday evening. Obviously the call happened 5 p.m. Eastern time, 2 p.m. Pacific time, which I guess that's right. Yeah, I don't know. Time zones are weird for me, but that's just because I've got a bad brain. But anyway, I want to talk about those things because there was some pretty substantial news. But before we get into that, there's a few things that fell through the cracks. So what happens is I don't have another YouTube channel that I can just watch their news video and then scalp the interesting details from that and then recreate my own channel. I actually have to compile information, and a lot of times that's been sent in by other people, so I appreciate everyone who has done that. But for the most part, it's just me finding things that are interesting, putting them on a Google document with links, and then talking about them, linking the articles down below, all sorts of good stuff. What happened this week was I had some stuff I'd pulled up on my phone and I didn't copy the links over. It wasn't in the rundown. So 4 stories, 5 actually, 5 quick stories, and we'll jump into the Kodak stuff. I'm not trying to lure you into the interesting things. There's timestamps, so if you just want to skip ahead to the Kodak stuff, I don't blame you, but I encourage you to stick around. At the very least, like this video and subscribe. I appreciate it very, very much. So we'll begin with a story that I almost remembered to talk about on Monday. This video about a drum scanning machine. It's a really quick video talking about drum scanning. I thought it was fascinating. I would check it out if I was you. It's 2-3 minutes long, I think, and I'll link that down below. That was pretty much it. And then we have a new update on the Dune film. There's going to be a 3rd Dune movie. Got my Dune exposures book right here. This thing is sick. But anyway, it's going to be the first one of the trilogy to be shot on film, IMAX film to be specific, which is very exciting news. This is also going to be Denis Villeneuve's first movie since Incendies that has been shot on film, which is very, very exciting news. In the vein of motion picture related news, Arri looks like it is up for sale. They are a institution in the motion picture camera business. They've got really phenomenal cameras, both film and digital, but unfortunately they are very expensive. So a lot of the times rental houses will own them and then rent them out. But due to a number of contributing factors, budgets and smaller productions, the cameras aren't being rented out as much, ergo they're not being bought as much. And due to declining sales and interest, the family that owns Arri might be looking to sell. There's not any huge developments, but it's just something that's being floated out there on a few sources. I have about $5 right now. So they have the Arri Alexa, and it wouldn't be that hard to just rename it the Arri Alex, you know what I mean? It's right there. Moving on to other camera news, Fuji came out with a little snippet basically reading that cameras like the X-Half and the GFX 100R, whatever, the other new camera, they're looking to potentially make new cameras in that vein of interesting concept cameras, unique things, just to kind of experiment and toy around with, whatever. And then finally we have a report from BCN Retail, and this is talking about the Kodak digital cameras. They're #1 sales figures, and I dug into that because this was popping up a few times. I think Petapixel did an article about it. I saw it somewhere else, and these are weekly reports that a retail company in Japan produces. July 14th to 20th, 2025, the Pixpro C1 Black was the most popular. Now, this doesn't really give a whole lot of concrete data for it. It just kind of says it's a popular thing, so that's cool, I guess. Volume of sales just says from this time period, which is 6 days, it's the best performing. So, and I could be reading this wrong, but it could be 10 of these sold. According to the site, Kodak has kind of rated highly the past couple of weeks, so take that information for what it is. Now let's crack into the reason you probably clicked on this video in the first place, and that is the Q2 2025 financial results from Kodak. I hopped on that call and it was very informative to some degree. I will admit that this is definitely not a strong suit of mine. I went to film school, so I'm not like a financial person by any stretch of the imagination, but I worked in the corporate world long enough to understand some jargon. Now, as this is like a publicly traded company, they do have shareholders. They have to have these meetings. They have to have this transparency with their books, so that way people know what they're investing in versus what they don't want to invest in. So you can get actually a pretty clear look at a lot of what's actually happening, despite how they might want you to think things are good or bad. Everything that I will talk about is linked down below. I highly encourage you to look at it yourself. I'm trying not to speculate too much, but I'm going to try to connect some of the dots based on what's being said. The first person on the call was somebody who just did like an introductory thing. Then Jim Continenza came on, and he's of course the CEO. One of the things that he really keyed in on is the tariffs and growing economic concerns. Now, as you may know, that's been a bit of a topic of conversation around these parts because it's affecting the American industries in one way or another. Now, the general idea and intent behind a tariff is to protect like some level of domestic production. We've seen this before in the past, Europe and America, with like an ongoing trade between us with like chickens and trucks. Don't know why, but it's a whole thing. The intent behind that is to protect the European poultry industry by not importing our heavily GMO'd Hulk chickens, and protect our automotive industry by not importing smaller, better, more fuel-efficient vehicles. The tariffs should be a benefit to Kodak to some degree because they are a US-based company. They do all their production out of Rochester in upstate New York, as some of you may know. However, it's not all that meets the eye because they do have to import certain things, and something they continue to cite in this whole process was the decrease in operational EBITDA was primarily driven by lower volumes and higher aluminum and manufacturing costs, partially offset by price increases and lower spend on investments in information technology systems, organizational structure, and costs associated with trade shows. There were higher expenses with aluminum and with workforce. They combated that by raising costs a little bit, decreasing their presence in showrooms, and otherwise just kind of slimming down on some of the non-essential things like IT. Now, Jim Continenza then goes on to promote the business as one of the few companies that produces lithographic prints, photographic industrial films, and also then touting their burgeoning success in the pharmaceutical industry with regulation from the FDA, meaning that they can now produce regulated pharmaceutical products as well as some unregulated pharmaceutical products. The hope is to produce phosphate buffered saline for laboratory use and eventually create other saline solutions, that way increasing a different market in which Kodak could potentially thrive in because they would be a domestic source to produce those things. I'm not too cued in on other sources of saline solution and whatnot. I don't know if that's domestic or if that's imported. It's something that they're throwing their hat in the ring, and it sounds like it's something they invested heavily in this last few quarters to get going. Now, this kind of goes into the next bit where they say a lot of things that sound okay, but in reality are maybe not the best thing in the world, which is the money that they have on hand. These are liquid assets. These are things that they can spend on, which is important for something we'll discuss in a little bit. But the general idea is that they had, at the end of December 31st, 2024, $210 million in cash assets. And the hope, if I recall from those financial statements, is they wanted to raise their cash and increase their general liquidity in order to make more long-term investments in certain things, so on and so forth. As it stands currently, they're at $155 million in cash assets. Q2, we saw a significant improvement in our use of cash compared with the first quarter, reducing our cash balance by $3 million to $155 million, which is, I think, what I will tell my financial advisor. I'm not spending a lot of money on broken cameras. I'm improving my use of cash. See if that one flies. Oh, I guess it was only $201 million on December 31st. I did my math wrong. So it was a decrease of $46 million all told, meaning $3 million in this last quarter. $43 million in the first quarter. They're not in a great place at the moment, but they're not in the worst place ever. They don't have zero. They do have some money, which is good. What we need to remember is the KRIP, the Kodak Retirement Income Plan. This is, of course, the pension plan that Kodak sold off recently. Now, of course, this was being sold off to a number of different groups for pennies on the dollar in order to increase Kodak's liquid assets in which they could use to pay off some of their debts and their obligations. But I think they're still kind of waiting on a few things up in the air before they can really pin down if this is going to work. And by this, I mean something that is cited in the Form 10Q, really long and boring financial form going over all sorts of information about a company. I will link it down below. If you have a hard time falling asleep, I highly recommend you read it. But what I want to bring your attention to is note 1, which is on page 9. Basis of presentation is going to kind of go over some of the just general information. It's a really fascinating read, but I'm going to go into the going concern because that is the most prominent. And there's a bunch of stuff and numbers in here which is important to read, but I will skip down to the second to last paragraph, which is, as of the date of issuance of these financial statements, Kodak has debt coming due within 12 months and does not have committed financing or available liquidity to meet such debt obligations. If they were to become due in accordance with their current terms, these conditions raise substantial doubt about Kodak's ability to continue as a going concern. So within 12 months, if the terms of these obligations do not change, Kodak will not have the means or the resources to fulfill those obligations, and thus could then be seeking some kind of like bankruptcy again. And then from this Market Watch article, which is just a kind of helpful overview of stuff. It has a very shocking title to it, though, and it is Kodak warns investors it might not be around much longer. More shocking than that is the fact that they used a Kodak Duoflex 2 as one of the images to represent Kodak. That was shocking to me. The article basically cites some of that information as well as Kodak's recent history, dancing with the devil that is, of course, insolvency and bankruptcy and so on and so forth. This is a very much more consolidated perspective of all of the jargon that I read out. It is a little bit strongly worded, I would say, and it does show that the company's stock dropped nearly 20% in the extended session on Monday, which that could be true. I don't know. I've not really checked. Growing concern for the company is to reduce expenses for the rest of the year, focus on long-term investments, probably going to be more of like the pharmaceutical route, maintaining its growth in that area, because that could be a new line on some pretty major capital, which would be very important because the KRIP is not totally under Kodak's control. It is not deemed probable under US GAAP, which I looked it up, and the GAAP is like generally accepted accounting principles. So it's basically saying the bird in the hand is worth more than two in the bush. The KRIP is the bird in the bush, or the two birds in the bush, and they're looking at the bird in the hand. We're trying to get one of those birds in the hand. That makes sense. It's not counting the eggs before they hatch. In the press release for the Q2 2025 financial results, Kodak does list a going concern assessment, which then cites the Q10 report. So if you want to check that out, I encourage you to do so. It's, again, really great material if you need help falling asleep. And then there's more breakdowns in terms of what's actually making them money versus not making money. Modest step down in print, modest step up in advanced materials and chemicals. The total revenue is $259 and $263 in Q2 2024. So again, a slight setback, but not majorly huge. So with all that being said, what does this mean for film photographers? I don't really want to speculate too much. I would suspect that this at the very least means that Kodak is going to be very frugal the next little bit of the year. Probably not going to be seeing any new film releases or anything crazy on that front. I think they're going to try to just keep with the status quo, increase profits wherever they can. It's kind of funny looking at it in this context, because when I'm talking about companies like Orwo and the new film that they've released, or I'm talking about Harman Phoenix and the new film that they've released, especially color film, we inadvertently, at least in my mind, base it off of the current Kodak stocks. How does this compete with Gold, Ultramax, Pro Image, Portra, Ektar, any of those? In that sense, it is such a juggernaut. It is such a infallible titan of the industry. Then if you look at just their general performance in the market so consistently, it feels like things are kind of faltering to some degree. I'm not a business person. I don't really get any of this stuff too much. I like to think that their investment in pharmaceutical industry stuff, that could potentially yield some favorable results. And whether or not film is like on the increase or the decrease, there wouldn't be as beholden to that industry. It just is a very fascinating conundrum to look at. And that's pretty much it. Those the Q2 2025 financial results from Kodak. There were a lot of numbers. It was very confusing. I probably did a terrible job of recounting all of it. I might dive into it more the rest of this week and report back to you next Monday with some more like thoughts, feelings, opinions. But leave a comment down below. Do you think Kodak is in trouble? I might even put up a poll, but I'd really love to hear what you all think about this information. See how it shakes out. We should have some more concrete information on August 15th. And then I guess we'll just have to kind of play it by ear through the rest of the year, see where that all ends up. Check out all of the links below for everything. A quick roundup. Kodak is in financial trouble. Dune 3 is going to be shot on IMAX film. There's a great video talking about drum scanning. I guess Kodak's digital cameras are performing well, allegedly in Japan. And Arri motion picture cameras might be looking to sell to somebody at some point. That is all for the news today. Thank you so very much for watching. Appreciate it as always. Like the video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to the channel. And I'll catch you guys on next Monday's news video. And I've got other videos this week, so stay tuned for that.